Good morning, everyone. We're very happy to welcome you to this webinar on the European agricultural crisis. And we are also very happy to welcome four high-quality experts. So there will be Panayotis Kalfounsos. He's our Greek speaker, and he is the head of the farmers cooperative in Thessaly. It's called Teski. For the Nourrir Collective, we have Mathieu Courgeot with us, who is its vice president, Aurélie Catalot, head of French agriculture at IDRI, and Gesine Langlotz, spokesperson of ABL Farming, the German Farming Trade Union. You will be able to introduce yourself with more details when it's your time to take the floor. Let me just explain how things will work from a technical point of view. Each speaker will speak in their mother tongue. So if you want to listen to the language that you want as a participant, you have a button at the bottom of your screen. It's called Interpretation. You click on it. You can choose to listen to the original audio without any interpretation if you speak the language. Or you can choose German, French, English, Greek. And you can go back and forth between languages if it's useful for you. Finally, if you want to ask questions, we have a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, so you can ask your questions, and we'll take 15 minutes at the end for a Q&A session. I hope that is clear for everyone, and we will get started now. The goal of the webinar is to analyze the causes of this major agricultural crisis in Europe, in several European countries. And we'd like to see what the potential solutions are to exit the crisis so that all farmers and consumers can live in a decent way and eat healthy food. So I have a first question about the causes of the crisis. And I would like each of you to explain what you think the main causes are, structural, conjunctural causes of the crisis in the past few years, and also more recently, if you think there might have been triggers in your respective countries, and more generally speaking, at our European level. Let's start with Panayotis regarding the Greek situation. So in Greek, there was a natural disaster called Daniel. It occurred a while ago when it made the situation very challenging in terms of farmers' yield. So you'll explain to us what happened and give us some background. Each speaker will have 5 minutes for this question and also 5 minutes to answer my second question later. And then we'll have a 15-minute Q&A session with the audience. Panayotis, you have the floor. Thank you.
Καλησπέρα. Είμαι ο Παναγιώτης Καλφούτζος, πρόεδρος
Good morning. My name is Panayotis Kalfountos, and I am chairman of TES-GI, the Cooperative Farmers of Thessaly. Thank you for today's invitation. I'm convinced that it is very important that we exchange experiences and also discuss these topics, which are slightly different in our different countries. In Greece, we have an enormous problem with high production costs. Our farmers are really suffering under these costs. They are simply not sustainable for certain crops. This system has to change. One of our biggest demands as part of my cooperative, as part of farmer associations, is the diesel prices, as well as diesel for agricultural vehicles. We would like to see subsidies for agricultural diesel. The government in Greece gives us a certain reduction per hectare. At the moment, we have seen a tripling in diesel prices compared to the situation a few years ago. As I said, this is a big issue for farmers in Greece. It is a big issue because we have crops that need a certain amount of irrigation, a certain amount of electricity. In addition to this, we are also facing a number of different problems. For example, we also see prices rising, doubling, tripling compared to last year when it comes to fertilizers and other different tools in agriculture. Simultaneously, we see that prices have also increased, especially last year, compared to the situation before the crisis. For example, when we look at corn. What does that mean? It means that our crops generate less income, but the costs for production of corn continue to rise. For example, we have agricultural machinery that cost 60,000 euros a few years ago and now costs 150,000 euros. So put simply, I can say that we are facing this increasing cost level in all different areas. And at the same time, the yields are less and less productive. Of course, we also have to face economic crises. We've also had to face the pandemic. So you can imagine that we are really struggling. Farmers in Greece are struggling. And this is also why they take to the streets. Production costs are simply too high. They continue to rise. And this is also connected to the lack of sustainability that we have in agriculture in Greece today. I don't think that this is a problem that Greece has to face on its own. It's something we see throughout the EU. Secondly, I would like to say a few words about farmers' rights in Greece, especially connected to the new common agricultural policy. In Greece, there were 10 different measures, policy measures that the Greek government proposed. But I think that these measures are not sustainable. We know that especially small productions, small farms are really struggling to meet these new demands. We see that the transition towards a greener type of agriculture is certainly laudable. But I think that these measures take time. You cannot simply bring them about from one day to the next. You really have to tackle the root of the problem. In addition to this, we have a very difficult situation with regards to geopolitics. We see that the European policy has shifted recently. We see that the measures that we now want to implement are softened. They are sort of pulled back in some areas, but still the Greek farmers are taking to the streets. And why are they doing so? We demand that all new policy measures, the red tape around fertilizer and other EU regulations are pulled back. We need these regulations that are in favor of greener agriculture to be realistic. The EU needs to find clear answers for this. We farmers want to bring about a new era for the common agricultural policy. We want to see a new structure that takes into account a different number of parameters, for example, the ongoing war in the Ukraine or the pandemic. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Panayotis, pour cette vision globale
Panayotis, thank you very much for this global outlook of the Greek situation. I'm going to give the floor to Gesine Langlots from ABL. So you're the spokesperson of this a German trade union for farmers. So same question, what's the situation in Germany and why is there so much protest coming from farmers in Germany?
Ja, hallo, vielen Dank für die Einladung.
Hello, also from my side, thank you for the invitation. And can everybody hear me? In Germany, we've seen the protests beginning before Christmas, after changes that were made to subsidies in Germany. And what we've seen then was that farmers throughout the country started to protest against these policy changes. I think that today the demands that farmers bring forward are rather vague. Slowly, these demands are more and more concrete. We also have a number of different associations, also right-wing extremist farmers associations who come together, who take to the streets. We've seen that these protests were very visible. There was one week where lots of farmers protested in the German streets. And this was very surprising for a big part of the German society. My association, the ABL, the Association for Agriculture, has not been very active in this farmers' protests. Many members of my association did protest, especially against this takeover from right-wing extremists, but there was a lot of effort made around communication. We especially tried to communicate clearly to other associations outside of Germany, our concerns and our problems. We have to say that in Germany, there's a very different analysis of the situation. There are certain German associations that would like to see liberation of agricultural policy. And then there's the opposite. There is associations pushing forward more protective political measures. In the beginning, the protests were very different, also from one federal state to the next. The organization was very different, although there was a certain kind of conservative hegemony. The problem that we see now is that there is a clear conflict between a more liberal approach to agriculture and a more protective approach. We know the changes that the European Union has suggested with this new common agricultural policy. We are all aware of these changes, but those details, they are not really taken into account. In Germany, the youth organization has tried to communicate around it, but that was it, basically. So we have to say that we are very curious to see where this whole discussion will take us. We see that farmers are now criticized, especially those who want to safeguard biodiversity, who want to push forward organic farming. These farmers are criticized and being told that their measures are too expensive, their demands are simply unrealistic. So we have these few stakeholders that want to push more progressive means, who also want to take into account the protection of biodiversity, climate change measures, organic farmers. So it will be exciting to see what these protests, especially also in Eastern Germany, will bring about, because it is an election year, especially in the eastern part of Germany, and we think that these protests will play an important role. So this is just a brief overview to what's been going on.
Merci beaucoup, Gedwin, pour cette situation allemande. Et c'est effectivement intéressant de mettre toutes ces situations.
So thank you for telling us more about the French situation. It's very interesting to hear all of the situations. And now let's move on to the next country, France, with Mathieu Courgeot, who's the head of the Collectif Nourrir. Mathieu, in 5 minutes, could you please give us an overview of the situation in France so that we can better understand what's happening there? I can hear some background noise. By the way, I don't know if someone has left their microphone on. I'm hearing something. I don't know if I'm the only one. So let's keep going. Mathieu, you have the floor. Thank you. Yes, I do hear the background noise, but it's okay, it's gone now. So I'm a farmer. I am a livestock breeder in France, and I'm the co-chair of the Collectif Nourrir, representing 54 organizations, farming organizations, as well as environmental organizations and civil society organizations. So just a few words on our analysis. It's very close to that of the colleagues who spoke just before me. We have to say that mobilization was huge, quite unprecedented. It had been a while since there has been such demonstrations from the farming world. It's not just one crisis. There are several crises, and analyses and demands might be different. So from a political point of view, it's not easy to respond. And I think there's a discomfort in the farming world, and it's spreading to the whole European. Oh, I can hear the translation at the same time. So the main problem in France was mostly compensation income. One farmer out of 5 in France lives under the poverty threshold. So the figure is very significant, and there are income inequalities that are growing in the agricultural industry, and there are more and more poor farmers and farmers that are getting richer and richer. So growing inequalities that are part of the problem that we have today. Agricultural prices were quite acceptable for a couple of years. Now the prices are going down in terms of production. And for 15 years now, we've had quite unstable agricultural prices. And for us farmers, it makes our daily job more and more complicated. It's hard for us to see what's going to happen in the future. Investments are done on longer periods of time. Unstable prices are a real challenge for us. And as the Greek colleague said, production costs are on the rise, even in quite independent systems. You know, in my system, we do not buy pesticides or fertilizers. We do buy equipment. So production costs are rising, but it's not necessarily related to the increase in our products' cost. And last but not least, it's quite specific to the beginning of the crisis in France, south of France, because of organic farming. And in the Occitanie region, it's 20% of organic farming. So that was the beginning of the demonstration and challenges related to organic farming. So income is the key point, really, for farmers. But for now, we haven't received real responses from the French government. And the other thing is that there's more and more vulnerability to many crises. There was the health crisis, the avian flu crisis, and more recently, there was the episodic disease in the southwest of France, climate problems as well, more droughts. All of that increases the feeling of vulnerability in farming. And finally, one last point. there's a lack of renewal of generations. There are fewer and fewer farmers, 200 farms disappearing every week. So who is going to take over? That's the main question. Most farmers will retire in the next 10 years. Who's going to take over? That's an uncertainty. It's not necessarily part of the priorities, but it's definitely a key issue for us. And just a word about standards. I think that we should definitely address it. When you say standards can be understood in many different ways, but it's mostly about how our income is based on the Common Agricultural Policy aid, and that's a problem for us. What about the price of our products then? What about what we do, our work? It's not worth a lot because we rely so much on the CAP aid. So we're very uncomfortable with that. And for standards, it's very complicated. For those raising poultry in free range, for example, it can be very complex in terms of standards. And there are also many inequalities in trade standards on imports. Obviously, realities may be different, but it's a source of a lot of problems for us. One last thing. In France, there's competition among trade unions, so there will be professional elections in less than 1 year. It had an impact on mobilization in some regions. In my region, for example, there are not so many challenges as in other regions. So I think that there's a whole set of problems requiring very strong structural responses in France and everywhere else in Europe. It has been lasting for a very long time now. It needs to be addressed. Thank you very much, Mathieu. So we were talking about standards, European standards. Aurélie, I know that you worked a lot on the Common Agricultural Policy, CAP, and European agricultural policies in general. Could you please share your analysis about France and within the European Union, more generally speaking? Are there specific policies that need to be tackled? What about the point of view of IDRI? Hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting me. My name is Aurélie Catalot, and I work for a French think tank that is called the Institute of Sustainable Development and International Relations, IDRI. But just to sum up all the challenges that were presented by the different speakers coming from 3 member states, I think that we can say that the European food system is facing many challenges that are common within the European Union. Obviously, there are very different farming structures from one member state to the other, but precisely with a common agricultural policy, we're trying to come up with responses that are common yet adapted to the specific challenges of each member state. And yet putting the farmers in a competition on the market. So that leads to many tensions. Let's try to think of all the challenges faced by French and European farmers. So there are 3 main categories. Economic challenges, first of all. Obviously, there's the issue of income, having an income that's sufficient and stable throughout time, as Mathieu said. There's also the issue of healthy food, having enough food to feed Europe or even countries outside of Europe. And still in the economic category, there's also a growing imbalance between supply and demand in terms of food on domestic markets. Then, social challenges. There's the question of the renewal of farmers, generations of farmers. And there's also the recognition of farmers, recognizing the dignity of being a farmer in our society today. And finally, there are environmental issues, environmental challenges. we talk a lot about reducing CO2 emissions for farmers. That's one of the challenges, but that's not the only one. When we talk about climate and agriculture, there's also carbon storing and soil adapting agriculture to climate change. And also, to some extent, we need to keep in mind the supply of biomass coming from agriculture to other sectors in the economy so that they can decarbonize their sector. There's also the preservation and restoration of biodiversity and natural resources, especially water resources. So I just share with you a very long list of challenges, and European farmers need to address all of them. What they see today is that the European food system, as it is organized by the CAP, does not enable them to address these challenges. So I think there's a legitimate anger or discomfort in this profession. Now, what about the triggers? I gave you a list of challenges that was true in January, but it was the case 6 months ago, and it will be the case in 6 months. So in France, there was a lot of rage boiling since the month of November. Certain local groups in the major French trade unions started demonstrated in November. They were saying that things were really upside down. It took a whole new level in January when our German colleagues did the same. I think that the German situation really set fire to the French situation beginning of 2024. What we heard is that it might be because of the Green Deal if French, German, European farmers decided to protest now. But in fact, there are two things that are contradictory. So it might be because of the Green Deal, the European Union, that would go too far in terms of environmental regulation. But sometimes we also hear that it's because of the how the legislation is translated in France, France going even too far compared to EU regulations. So that's quite contradictory. When we have a look at the Green Deal and how the law is translated in France, it's not the key factor in farmers' anger. The farming part of the Green Deal does not translate into any additional obligation for European farmers. It was either postponed or largely diluted or not even in force right now, so it can't be because of that. And in terms of how the law has been translated in France, sure, it could be the case, but it has been the same in other European countries, so that's not consistent. At IDRI, we think that what we need is top-down harmonization at a European level rather than less EU regulation. And let me now wrap up. European farmers' demonstrations are very interesting because we need to wonder about how we led the farming revolution so far. As you know, at a European level, the debate is polarized. So there's the eco-friendly environmental movement saying we need to reach the environmental targets whatever it costs, and without thinking about what the impact might be on farming income. And then you have production-oriented farmers saying, I don't have any leeway financially speaking to change, so I don't care about the environment. So in order to go beyond that, we need to reassert that they're not mutually exclusive. There's the ecological transition and farming income. And now the question that we need to ask ourselves is, what are the conditions that need to be set up so that farms can survive and reach the environmental goals? So no answer has been brought to the question right now when the European Commission came up with the Green Deal. So we should not give up on these targets, but we need to question the method and how economic factors are taken into account when we want to support the agroecological transition. Thank you very much, Aurélie. Thank you for your comments. A lot of food for thought. So I think we can now close this first part on the challenges faced by European farmers in their countries, and we can now move on to the second part of this webinar, which is really what can we do to solve the crisis? So what are the policies that should be set up locally and at our European level as well? Leaders in different countries pointing their fingers at environmental standards. In France, the government said that they should stop suspending the Ecofito plan. In Italy, they're saying that they might work on the size of farms in order to bring profitability to farmers. So I wanted to know what you think of these solutions shared by governments or trade unions. So we'll start the second part with Gesine. She will speak in German. So this is for interpreters. Interpretation from French into German is actually on French. It's a technical glitch. For those who would like to listen to German now, please go back to main audio floor. Well, this is just for interpreters. You know what you're supposed to do. So I'll give the floor to Gesine on the German situation. What type of intervention you think should be necessary for Germany and Europe as a whole? You have the floor. 5 minutes, please.
Okay, also ich habe jetzt ein bisschen mit meinem alten
All
Französisch
right. So I think I understood what I had to do, like there was a technical issue.
Ich verstehe Französisch nicht so richtig. Bin ich
I
die
don't understand French, so do I have to change the channels?
Dolmetsch abschalten?
No, you can just answer the question.
Okay, kein Problem. Gut.
Did you understand the question?
Also, ich soll jetzt erzählen, quasi, was Reaktionsmöglichkeiten
All right, so I will now talk about the German solutions or my interpretation of German solutions. Is that right? Okay, perfect.
Also, es sind ja eigentlich jetzt alles
Well,
Mythe, würde ich sagen.
we have heard all of these answers, all of these proposals time and time again. There's nothing new, nothing radical. We just have like this right-wing extremists now taking to the streets. That's maybe new. But in general, I think that there are two different paths that we can set out on and in order to change something for the daily lives of farmers. I think firstly, it would be important that green NGOs and NGOs working around climate should really take these questions into account. Economy has to be put on the top list of priorities. I think that this framing was not done in the right way, especially in Germany during the past few years. And when talking about political measures, I think that subsidies need to be adapted as part of the new common agricultural policy. Why? Well, because there are many questions we still need to answer, especially around big farms, around large land prices, and also we need to reinforce the existing structures and protect biodiversity. When you look to different federal states, there are already good examples. For example, in Saxony, also around forestry. That's something that we need to focus on in the future in Germany as well as in France. But we need to have the expertise and we need to have long-term financial models for these projects. I think that agricultural models need time to adapt. They need decades in order to adapt. So these subsidies need to be adapted in a long-term way. For example, now we have the discussion of tax breaks on agricultural diesel in Germany. That's a very short-term measure, I think. we really need to answer these questions. If we want to ensure a long-term supply of good quality food, you really need to ensure that these structures are in place. However, we've seen during the past few years that on a European level, we've had conservative policy leaders, and now we have these liberals making decisions. So, of course, there's a bit of a clash of ideas. But like I said, I think the long-term effects are most important. I'm not sure if I can have the time to go into detail. Please, yeah, you have about 7 minutes for your answer. Okay, that's all right. So how many more minutes do you have left? Maybe 2 or 3? Okay, I can do it. And then, on the other hand, we also need to strengthen the position of farms today. We really have a problem with land prices in Germany. These prices have doubled, tripled, quadrupled, especially in the eastern part of Germany. And this is very detrimental to the country in general. It's difficult for young people to get into farming, into agriculture, which then again makes it difficult to bring about changes in the system and integrate new ideas. And then, as I said, it's an election years in Eastern Germany. Lots of mistakes have been made throughout the past 30 years, and we will now have to face the consequences. I think we need to try and keep big investors out of agricultural policy in Germany. That's something that we need to be aware of, and especially in the eastern part of Germany, as I said, but also in northern Germany, and it also affects farmers in the south of Germany, because the competitiveness of small farms against these giants is, of course, under pressure. We have a lot of pressure in our associations in all of these regards, but at least there are new law proposals in the pipeline on a government level. I think this is why it's important that the civil society really rises up and insists that we find answers to these questions. And then finally, I think that we need to really look into what's going on with retailers and large-scale processors, Lidl, Aldi in Germany. These giants have too much power. They have 95% market shares. They simply decide which prices they can set. So that's really something that we have to tackle. And it's also a reason for this really intense frustration that farmers today have to face. So I think that the power between the state and big retailers really has to be rebalanced. There needs to be a shift, and we cannot forget about the position of farmers who are then in the crossfire of government and large retailers. So, like I said, we really need to strengthen the position of farmers in this system and also lift the level of prices for agricultural products. I think this will bring about changes, and this is something we have to do.
Merci beaucoup, Gesine. Je vais passer ensuite la parole à
Thank you,
Panayotis.
Gesine. I would like to give the floor to Panayotis now. So, same question. What about your Greek point of view on the crisis, potential solutions that you have in mind within your cooperative to end the crisis? You have the floor.
Est-ce que ça fonctionne pour Panayotis?
Panayotis, can you hear me? Alors le son est c'est mauvais. The sound is not very good, unfortunately.
Unfortunately,
Ouais. Ah.
unfortunately, the connection is really bad.
Alors, Panayotis, est-ce que c'est bon maintenant?
Okay, so Panayotis, is it working now?
Donc je vais reposer la question.
Let me
Super.
ask the question again. Great, seems to be working.
La parole pour avoir une
So,
perspective
I'm giving you the floor now. Would like to hear your point of view in Greece on the situation tell us about the potential solutions that you have in mind at your cooperative.
Είναι ότι ο ευρωπαϊκός είναι με πάρα πολλές προκλήσεις, τις οποίες και σε
All
αυτό.
right. I think that I can say that we are faced with lots of different challenges in Greece. So instead of talking about the Green Deal, we should rather discuss what is important to farmers so that we can actually continue to count on farmers and their work and important participation in society. I think that there are a number of crises that we will need to confront in the upcoming years. When I take a look at the situation in my region, I see that the climate change phenomena already play an important role. And that's something we haven't even mentioned so far. In my region, we have seen the catastrophe, flooding, 300 cubic meters of soil per minute were flooded, and there is an issue with the sound again. The connection is bad.
Συνέβη κάτω από το νερό. Οπότε η κλιματική αλλαγή δεν είναι κάτι μελλοντικό που θα έρθει, έχει έρθει.
So when we hear talk about climate change, this crisis of climate change, then this is not something that will be a problem in the future. No, it is already a problem right now. It is something that will continue to shape our everyday lives, especially the everyday lives of farmers. Farmers need to ensure that they are well prepared to tackle these challenges, and they can only be well prepared if they receive the sufficient financial means and support. Farmers need to invest today so they can ensure a production of safer crops, of future-proof crops, and at the same time, the government needs to also play a more active role in setting the prices for agricultural products. And at this point, I would like to add something else, another challenge that we face, a challenge that we will need to better prepare for. And this concerns farmers throughout Europe. And I am talking here about unfair competition. There are unfair trading practices outside of Europe that also concern EU countries, because we know that in third countries there are no real checks on qualities, on contents of agricultural products. These checks are not happening often enough and not concerning all deliveries. And it means that there are agricultural products reaching European markets that are not meeting the standards that we, European farmers and producers, need to meet. I think this is a real problem for competition today. It is simply an unfair trading practice. This is why bilateral trade agreements between the EU and third countries need to be revised, especially with those countries that have unfair trading practices or have production standards that do not meet our own. We have to ensure that this competition is rebalanced. Looking at our own production, we also have to talk about the role that organic farms and organic farmers play. We see that these farms and production sites have a lower production rate than conventional farms, and that means that the quality is usually better, but quantitatively, these organic farms are, of course, far below the standards set for conventional farms. And finally, I would like to add that we need to talk more about the common agricultural policy. Through this instrument, we can take into account the differences between agricultural regions, between agricultural climates. It is something that we have to take into account on a European level. I think it should help us focus on the different problems farmers have to face in different regions, because Greek farmers have issues that may differ from those that German farmers face. I think that policies on a European level need to ensure that these differences are visible and that we are all aware of them. In addition to better information, this would also help us prepare for competition throughout Europe. I think that there is a proposal to further strengthen these regional differences, and this is something that I am very pleased to see. But we really need to look into these different regional problems and find the most adapted solutions.
Merci beaucoup, Panayotis.
Thank you very much, Panayotis, for your very comprehensive comments. Now, let's move on to Aurélie to hear her analysis of the French situation and the potential solutions that you developed at IDRI. And of course, you can also talk about European policies if you want. Sure, thank you. So I would like to talk about the announcements made by the French government in order to ease the anger of French farmers. They announced many things, lots of concessions. So I think it's quite relevant to try and categorize the different types of announcements that were made. Then we can analyze what kind of announcement is really to get out of the crisis, or something that's more political on the long term to improve the situation for farmers. So the Prime Minister made announcements for French farmers. There were a couple of announcements, but not so many on income. It was mostly additional state money that was paid faster to farmers just to respond to the crisis. In terms of income, he also talked about the value distribution throughout the whole value chain, so the agri-food business and large retailers should be better controlled to make sure that the most damageable practices should be avoided for farmers. But those are the two solutions that he came up with for income. Otherwise, it was not really a topic that he focused on. There were many political announcements that were promises to streamline the red tape administrative burden for farmers, or even the other types of burdens, so simplification of the legal system when there are complaints in terms of water storage, or how some breeding farms should be increased in size. There were also other announcements on things that are very French specific or European level rules in terms of CAP conditionality. As you know, the European Commission, under the pressure of France, decided to give up on one rule of the cap, which is a share of non-productive arable land. There was also an announcement of on sovereignty to improve the sovereignty of French agriculture to meet French needs. However, such announcements are quite surprising, because when you talk about French sovereignty, what it shows is that we are not really sovereign. So that's a good opportunity to put forward the real weaknesses of French agriculture. And finally, among the French announcements, there were commitments made by France to address topics at a European level, for example, for international trade, the Mercosur agreement, and the introduction of so-called mirror clauses in free trade agreements. generally speaking. So those are the main categories of solutions that were shared by the French government. What we can see is that some answers really answer the main points that had been shared by French trade unions, but there's no structural answer to address the challenges that I mentioned before. And farmers put a lot of pressure on the government to have quick, concrete solutions. But it's not in 3 weeks that you can put an end to a crisis that has been lasting for 10 years now. At IDRI, what we think we need is we should organize a public debate on our agricultural model and the vision that we have of agriculture at our European level and in France. A bit before, I said that we're facing a major problem because we cannot connect the physical dimension and the ecological dimension of farming. In France, when we work on our strategy to lower CO2 emissions for farming, nothing is said about the impact on production volumes or farmers' yield. The only thing that is said is that if we do it, we will be able to reduce the CO2 emissions by a certain number. And we don't tell farmers, in this case, it means you will produce less wheat, but there will be other crops that will grow. You'll have to change your whole production system in this way or another way. And it's a gridlock. That's why environmental policies do not work. So beyond the quick answers to stop the crisis, to meet farmers' needs, we need to take a step back, take the time to gather all agricultural stakeholders in Europe, in France, to agree on the economic impact of environmental efforts that we are asking farmers to do. And at the same time, we need to define the economic support measures that a society is ready to do so that farmers can do this transition successfully. Thank you. That's perfect, Aurélie. Thank you. And we will wrap up this webinar with Mathieu before moving on to the Q&A session. Mathieu from the Collectif Nourrir. So let's talk about how we can end the crisis from your point of view, from the point of view of your collective. And then we'll take some questions. 4 questions, you can ask some more questions if you wish. Mathieu, you have the floor. Well, just to echo what Aurélie just said, I think that everybody was so much involved in so many European countries, which means there's a democratic problem. That's very clear. There are large-scale demonstrations everywhere. So there's a democratic issue. It's at the heart of the crisis and at the heart of its resolution as well. At a national or European level, we need to take time to think of our food and farming democracy and try to connect the two a bit more than what we're doing at the moment. That's a real challenge. Then going back to some measures, farming income is at the heart. So the price of farming products, it's really at the heart of everything. There needs to be European answers, a continuous deregulation of trade, as was done by the European Union. So they need to put an end to that and be in control of it, of prices. That's something that needs to be done at a European level. There's also the continuation of trade deals. They are said to be more and more progressive, but I think it's a real question. You know, should we send food all around the planet? That's a real question. There's also the issue of speculation on farming markets. Just to give you an example, the 10 largest financial groups made more than 2 billion euros in profit in the first half of 2022. So there are people who really can benefit from the crisis in Ukraine. So there's money made in the agri-food business, in the farming world. So the challenge is that of the distribution of income. The second point revolves around the distribution of production sectors. So there are growing inequalities between farmers. It's a reality. And we cannot build a future for farmers if we do not talk about production factors. So land, how can we distribute land? Access to water, obviously, it's discussed everywhere across Europe. Access to subsidies, CAP subsidies, 80% of CAP subsidies go to 20% of farmers in France. We cannot succeed in transitions if things are not done in a fair manner. So distribution should really be at the heart of the next European policies. Third point, how to support people in this transition. I can see my colleagues who are making so many efforts for the environment, and then to see the announcements made by the French government and the Green Deal. So they're thinking we make so much effort, we're not paid by the CAP. We do not get anything for it. So I think there are so many farmers who are doing so many great things for the environment to relocate food. We need to support them in the next months and years. Obviously, it means that there should be a reform of the CAP. We need to lower reliability on pesticides, fertilizers, equipment, and machinery. We need to have different systems for cows, for grazing, but all of these things are not supported by the CAP, which is the largest financer for farmers at a European level. There's the problem of the renewal of generations, as I said before, and there's also the issue of food. In France, there are between 3 and 5 million of people who have access to food aid. So there's a share of farmers who cannot make a living and consumers who cannot afford the products either. So many inequalities, and that's the real debate. If we want to upgrade our products, we need consumers to buy them, which means we need to address inequalities in society to be able to upgrade the products also from a consumer's point of view. That's what I wanted to share with you. Thank you so much to all of you, all four of you, for your comments that were so fascinating on the structural, conjunctural causes of the crisis in Europe and the potential solutions that should be envisaged. Let's move to the questions now. We have 10 of them. I don't think we'll be able to answer all of them, but I'll give the floor to Benjamin, who will present the questions in two parts, I think, and then you guys just take the floor whenever you want. It's up to you. So let's take 10 minutes for the questions, and then we'll wrap up. Okay, so there are questions that are addressed to some speakers. First one comes from Greece, a question for Mathieu. So Mathieu, you referred to declining farming income. Do you include income transfers from the CAP? So in other words, is it the farm income that matters or the household income? There was a question on Gesine, on Germany. Is there's the same problem as in France, farmers getting very poor under the poverty threshold and leaving their farms? It hasn't been mentioned. And finally, a question on the European strategic at the EU. Could it be the public debate that Idri wants? So the first question was from Mathieu, if I'm not mistaken. Mathieu, go ahead. Okay, thanks. Yes, I was talking about farming income, obviously. I was talking about CAP subsidies. In France, it's a bit less at the European level, but in France, I think it's 80% of farming income coming from CAP subsidies. It varies, though, from one production sector to another. Let's take vegetables or trees, so you need a smaller surface areas. They don't get a lot of subsidies from CAP because CAP is based on the size of the farm. So for the sectors that I mentioned, they don't get a lot of subsidies. In France, we import half of the fruits and vegetables that we eat. So if we want to ensure food sovereignty or self-sufficiency in such sectors, we'll need to produce more. And we need to better channel the CAP subsidies. That could be a solution. And on the other side, we have large-sized farms that get a lot of subsidies from CAP. So the distribution method is not the right one. And then I talked about inequalities that exist depending on production sectors in France. Breeding, cattle breeding is a sector that has been shrinking, but for pig breeding or grains, farmers make more money in such sectors. So farming income, it's very hard to calculate it. But there are many figures that are interesting. I said that 18% of farmers are under the poverty threshold, including non-farming income. So that's the situation. But income farming, how to calculate it, farming income, it's much more complicated. It's quite low, and there are many inequalities, and I'll stop there. Thank you very much. Second question was for Gesine. Gesine, I hope you were able to hear the question. Let me repeat it. Is there the same phenomenon in Germany as in France? Farmers getting poorer and poorer?
Well, I think it's important to point out that there are great differences. When we talk about agriculture, there's not one phenomenon. We can talk about one situation. That's a mistake that politicians and decision makers often make. Agricultural production sites and farms are very diverse. There are regional differences. There are enormous differences between different types of agriculture, also between farms with livestock. And then there's the question of what actually counts as a farm, because there are many big farms in eastern parts of Germany that are now bought up by big investors. So for me, it's difficult to say whether that's the truth in Germany or not. But I would say that in the last 25 years, we see that the number of farms in Germany has been cut in half. So there are different reasons for this. Small family farms have sometimes been abandoned, have stopped producing, but some of those still exist. We have farmers with 2,500 hectares, 6,000 hectares, or 10 to 12,000 hectares, which are then brought together as part of one production site or agricultural super farm. So there are these different phenomenons. We see that 14% of the biggest farms in Germany working on two-thirds of soils in Germany. So we have these big structures. So that's something we have to take into account. We have farmers or, well, investors, industrial stakeholders who really make big money in agriculture. However, if I'm a small farmer with a small farm, the situation is very different. I might maybe only make 500 euros a month, which is a catastrophe. So we see that it is very difficult to survive as a small farmer or even get started with a small farm since land prices are incredibly high. So really, you have to take into account this situation. In general, we can say that in Germany, small farms are, of course, suffering and also working below the poverty line. However, you always need to ask the question of what you actually look at when you look at farms and impoverished farms, etc. We can say that lots of farmers also have to deal with a lot of debt. People who want to start farming need to invest 650,000 euros to just get started. I mean, this is an absolute disaster. So it's impossible to actually get into agriculture. We also see that farms with livestock have enormous problems with their level of debt. They still have to pay off debt of the original investment that they made in their livestock. So I think we really should think about public programs in order to reduce these levels of debt that make it deleveraging possible for these farms, especially if you make conditions for these deleveraging programs around organic farming and animal well-being. But we really need a political will to make this happen. And we also need to have pilot projects that really look at whether this is viable. In Germany, I think we need to also look at the supply chains, because if we want to change the system, we also need to adapt supply chains. And this area is also very critical in Germany. We have a problem with a lack of skills in many throughout many jobs along the agri-food business and value chain. This is something we see in Germany time and again. We have we have now a political will to actually change these structures, these supply chains. I think the situation in France is maybe less dramatic than in Germany. But yeah, this is the situation, I would say.
On avait une autre question adressée à l'IDRI.
Thank you. There was a question for Idri.
Oui, il y a une question qui vient de la Grèce.
Yes, question from Greece. So at the moment, the European Commission announced a postponement of the reduction of pesticides, which reduces part of the transition cost for farmers, makes big agrochemical companies happy. Do you have any suggestions to get out of this catch-22? And another question on the increase of fuel prices, that it's still going on and it's been a while. What about alternative fuels in the next few years? How can we phase out fossil fuels? Let me start. I would like to answer the question addressed to Idri on the public debate that we need. The strategic dialogue that was launched a few weeks ago by the President of the European Commission is, we think, a very relevant format for dialogue. I cannot say if this strategic dialogue will lead to the results that we want at IDRI, but in any case, the format is quite promising because there's confidentiality and it's possible to have a very close look at the diagnosis of farming today. When you talk about public debate, you think of a very large citizen convention with 400 people. At IDRI, we do not think that we could have such a large circle at the beginning because, and that's absolutely key, to this day, there's no compromise on what we should wish for farmers today. And that's the first thing that we should address. Let me give you an example. In France, we produce a lot of wheat. And at the same time, we're told that we need to produce more plant-based proteins, more beans. So people say, okay, that's great. Let's keep producing wheat. And others say, well, let's produce more legumes. But the thing is that we cannot extend arable land in France. If we have more leguminous plants, it will be at the expense of other crops, wheat, for example. And today there is no dialogue between these sectors, and there's no consensus to say, okay, we agree to produce more legumes, even though it might shrink land available for wheat and hence our export capacities. So we think it's absolutely key to initiate such dialogue, to have a consensus within the farming profession, and then with a bigger circle. So then it would be interesting to involve citizens and have something that's a bit more participatory in nature. But there is a complete lack of shared vision in farming sectors on the concrete physical transformations necessary for the agroecological transition. Thank you very much. Thank you, Aurélie. So there were other questions. Panayotis, would you like to add something? Would you like to answer some of these questions? Let's wait for the translations to reach the speakers, and we'll end with a comment by Panayotis to answer the questions that have been asked, and then we'll wrap up the webinar.
Δεν άκουσα λίγο την ερώτηση. Μπορεί να την επαναλάβουμε. Δεν ακούγεται ο ήχος.
Alors, je n'ai pas la traduction de Panayotis, donc je peux pas.
So I didn't get the translation of what Panayotis just said, so I cannot answer him.
Ναι, ακούμε τώρα.
Est-ce que Panayotis voudrait répondre à une des questions
Panayotis, would you like to answer one of the questions that were asked? I hope that interpreting still works. Panayotis, did you hear me? Did you understand?
Ναι, αυτό που έχω να πω εγώ σε σχέση με όλα όσα ακούστηκαν, τα οποία είναι προς τη σωστή κατεύθυνση, να επαναλάβω ότι θα πρέπει στη νέα κατάσταση όπως έχει διαμορφωθεί και μετά από ότι φαίνεται το πρόβλημα, αναδεικνύεται το ευρωπαϊκό πρόβλημα που υπάρχει στον τομέα των αγροτικών, θα πρέπει να δούμε με μεγαλύτερη επιστασία το κομμάτι το πώς θα οργανώσουμε την παραγωγή καλύτερα πάνω στην πράσινη ανάπτυξη, πάνω στη βιώσιμη ανάπτυξη, έχοντας όμως στο επίκεντρο τον παραγωγό και όχι να ξεκινάμε από τις Βρυξέλλες και να καταλήγουμε στον παραγωγό ανάποδα. Θα πρέπει να ξεκινήσουμε να δούμε πώς θα μπορέσει να διαμορφωθεί αυτή η κατάσταση έτσι ώστε η παραγωγή να είναι βιώσιμη, να είναι οικονομικά βιώσιμη και να μπορέσουν να αντιμετωπίσουν όλες τις προκλήσεις τις οποίες αναφέρθηκαν και δεν θέλω να επαναλάβω, αυτές οι οποίες μας βρίσκουν σήμερα όλους τους Ευρωπαίους αγρότες στους δρόμους.
Ok, je crois qu'il n'y a malheureusement pas eu de traduction dans aucune des langues. On est vraiment désolé pour ce.
I think there was no translation in none of the languages. We're very sorry. So the Greek interpreter said that they translated. Maybe there was a microphone problem for this last question. Well, I hope that everybody was able to listen to the rest of the webinar in their own language. I would like to thank all of you, all of our speakers for your brilliant comments. It was so interesting. Thank you to all of you for taking the time to share your point of view with us. It was nice to have this analysis coming from different European countries. Thank you to all our participants. who attended the webinar. I hope you enjoyed it. The webinar was recorded in all the languages, so you'll have access to it later. And goodbye, everyone, and bon appétit. Enjoy your lunch if you're about to have lunch in your country. Thank you, everyone. See you soon.
Au revoir.